Welcome to Red Church. We're a community following Jesus in his alternative way of life, seeking renewal in our hearts, our city, and our world. We pray this message encourages you, challenges you, and draws you closer to Christ. Let's jump in.
We are digging into the book of Acts, and we're moving towards Pentecost Sunday, which will be in a few short weeks. And as we move through the book of Acts, what you'll really sense is a sense of movement in this book. If you look at it, it begins in Jerusalem, but then there's this ripple, this going out, this almost thunderclap that rings through the world as people begin to hear the good news of Jesus. And what I would love to do today is begin in Acts 5. So we're sort of going forwards, we're jumping around a little bit, but we're building up to Pentecost Sunday. But I just want to jump ahead a little bit to Acts 5, and we're going to begin in verses 17 here. What's happened is the church, as the Spirit has fallen on the church is going out. Jesus, after his death and resurrection, has poured into the disciples. The disciples have become apostles, that is, sent ones. They're no longer just following the way of Jesus. They're going on the way out. And at this moment, something changes in the drama of the story. Then the high priest and all his associates, who were members of the party of the Sadducees, were filled with jealousy. They arrested the apostles and put them in the public jail. But during the night, an angel of the Lord opens the doors of the jail and brought them out. "Go stand in the temple courts," he said, "and tell the people all about this new life." Any story, any great narrative, be it a movie, a theatre production, a novel, has a particular structure. The content of so many of the stories that we follow are immensely different. Yet, what you will notice is that there is always some certain components. What you don't have is a story that people read where it is, Fred did an exam. Fred studied. Not a whole lot happened. And then Fred got a C and was pleased with himself and had a sandwich. End of the story. No, there's always Fred is going to do an exam, but then something goes wrong. There is a great challenge. There's something he needs to fight out there or in himself. There is always something that comes along that turns a bunch of ordinary events into a great drama. And whether you may like romantic novels or science fiction movies or even horror movies, whatever kind of story and genre that you're drawn to, the thing that is central to all of them is there is some kind of obstacle, a great trial, a battle that people inevitably encounter. And at the beginning of the book of Acts, we see this. We have this beautiful picture of the church where the church comes together. The Spirit has been poured out on them. They share meals, they share their funds, they come under the teaching of the apostles, and people are added to their day. And it's this beautiful image of the church, often and rightly preached on as a model of what the church should look like. But the interesting thing is, as the church is sharing their funds, ensuring no one is in need, there's a couple up the back who, as this is happening, as the Spirit is flowing, just have a little thought in their head. How do we leverage this? How do we actually get something out of this? And this couple, Ananias and Sapphira, what they do is actually start to work out their own kind of fraudulent activity. And ultimately, they pay the price with their lives. And I think it's a really important and sobering reminder at this moment, which is often held up by people. Well, this is where the church is at now. We should be like the church there. And yes, that's right. In Acts 2, 42 to 47, this beautiful picture of that church. But at that precise moment, the sort of utopian moment that we hold up, there are people in the midst of the church who are planning a scheme of corruption. As the church goes out, in Acts 5, as we just read then, the apostles are arrested. The success of the church, yes, people are drawn to what they're doing. This is the church doing everything that it should be doing, but still there are people that turn against the church. And the authorities arrest the disciples who are meant to go out and imprison them. Instead of apostles sent ones, we have people who are imprisoned and put behind walls. This church, which seems so idyllic and exactly what the church should be, but in Acts 6, there's dissatisfaction. The church is barely maybe a week old, days old, a month or so old, and a division between two groups in the church. There were two kinds of cultural groups, the Hellenic Jews, which were Jews who'd more grown up in the Greek-speaking culture, and then the Hebraic Jews, the ones that were more in the Hebraic or Hebrew culture. And there's this sort of argument that begins amongst these people about, well, the Greek widows or the Hellenic Jewish widows are not being looked after in the same way that the Hebraic ones are. And this division starts to happen and people start to complain. And it's interesting, if you look at the words used in the New Testament Greek and you trace them back to the Old Testament, the word here is grumbling. And it's the kind of grumbling which actually the people grumbled against Moses. So here we have the early church. Again, a picture of seeming perfection of what the church should be, but straight away, murmuring, dissatisfaction, grumbling, agendas start to come against the church. And ultimately, what this is about is distraction. So the mission goes out, but encounters corruption. The mission goes out, but encounters persecution. The mission goes out and encounters distraction. But what we see is that every one of these things is turned on its head. And this is really important for us to understand. Last week, I knew what Daniel was going to talk about. And so we chat about it during the week, and he felt this need to, for here, particularly at 10 a.m. at Nunawading, there is this call to create this goal. A goal gives purpose, it gives direction, it's vision. 20 people being baptized. Those baptisms will signal people coming to meet Jesus for the first time, coming back to Jesus, falling deeper in love with Jesus. And sort of knowing where the sermon was going, I sort of sat where I sit over there and watched it. And it's so interesting anytime someone speaks to a group about vision or purpose. What I noticed is people sat and they were listening to him. Daniel's obviously the service pastor here who's got a lot of relational connection with people. People know him. Many of you who've been here longer, like me, have seen Daniel develop over the years and step into his leadership. But there was a bit of a bit in the third act of his sermon. I don't know if you're thinking of your sermon as like a play with 3 acts, but that's how I was interpreting it. In the third act, Daniel then revealed 20 people baptized. We don't just come here to hang out. That's the direction that we're called to. That's where we're called to go if we're the church. And there was this fascinating, I don't know if people noticed this, but there was actually sort of people saying things and speaking out. I couldn't hear what everyone was saying. And it wasn't sort of like, you go, Daniel. Preach on, Daniel. Yes, it's good, Daniel. It was almost like people were unintentionally sort of responding. And what I noticed was happening is when you put a vision before people, it actually animates and motivates them. The scriptures say, without vision, the people perish. And so here's this future goal Daniel's put out there. By October, 20 people baptized. Now, there's going to be some people soon baptized at Campbell. That's already happening. There's people coming to faith. That's going to be happening. It's not just like, oh yeah, that'll be part of the number. Like what Daniel was saying, is particularly this service here. And when he did that, it creates a sense of excitement. But it's also important to recognize that when you outline a vision like the early church, inevitably you'll come up against things. A goal is animating, but the great drama begins and things will come against that. It may be the enemy. It may be our own flesh. It may be dynamics within us. So understanding what the scriptures are telling us today is not just important for us to learn as we look at the book of Acts, but this becomes super relevant for what Daniel has put out here as what he feels God is leading this congregation towards. And when you see these things come against the early church of corruption, persecution, distraction, the good news is what Jesus does is turn these strategies inside out. When corruption comes in the form of Ananias and Sapphira trying to use what the Lord is doing to financially enrich themselves through fraud, is what comes upon the church. We see in Acts 5, 11 to 17. It says, great fear seized the whole church and all who heard about these events. That word fear is phobos in the Greek, which also means awe and reverence. Corruption comes, but the Lord uses it and he turns it to a purifying work. It says the apostles then, in the wake of this, performed many signs and wonders among the people. More and more men and women believed in the Lord and were added to their number. The enemy came against to tempt Ananias and Sapphira towards corruption. You would think this would be a PR disaster for the church. And the church has had a long litany of PR disasters and corruptions which have come in its wake in its 2,000-year history. But what we see in this moment is the church responds by pressing into holiness and using this moment to respond to God's purifying, and the church goes forward. When persecution comes and the apostles, the sent ones, are put into jail, we see in Acts 5, verses 41, that after they're released, they go to the temple courts. The angel tells them, tell all the people about this new life. And the scriptures tell us that day after going to the temple courts and from house to house, they never stopped teaching and proclaiming the good news that Jesus is the Messiah. The devil attempted to shut them up and it failed. They just spoke more about him. And when this distraction, this grumbling, this pushing of agendas, this undermining of leadership, this undermining of other people in the church begins, the Lord again turns this distraction on its head and brings focus. Acts 6 verse 7 says, so the word of God spread. The number of disciples in Jerusalem increased rapidly, and a large number of priests, the very people who had set themselves against the work of God, became obedient to the faith. All three of these obstacles result in the growth of the church. Michael Green, in his book on how the early church in Acts grew, says this of the early disciples. Remember, these were the guys who often got it wrong, who often opposed Jesus and when he was saying what was going to need to happen. And yet we find them totally transformed in the book of Acts. He says this, you cannot defeat men like this. Tell them to keep quiet and they'll disobey you. Throw them into prison, they convert the jailer. Whip them and they rejoice to be allowed to suffer for Christ. Stone them within an inch of their lives in one city and they carry on with just the same message in the next. kill them, and others arise in their place. Endurance like that simply has to win in the long run. And he says, but we do not see enough of it in our Western church. You see, it's not enough just to have a purpose, a vision. It's easy to get people initially excited. As I said, when Daniel spoke of that goal, I could hear a little bubble of excitement. Something else is required. You see, purpose is the North Star. It shows us our mission. It's the coordinates towards which we are moving. But purpose, by its very definition, must happen in a process. And the process aids and strengthens the purpose. You understand this. This is anyone who does any creative work understands this. This process is less like an engineering feat where you put exactly on the wall what you're going to want to happen. You may still get there, but it's so weird and the journey is often non-linear, but it's often what happens on the journey towards the destination that is crucial. The great missionary to China, Hudson Taylor, said this: there are 3 stages in every great work of God. First, it's impossible. Then it's difficult. Then it's done. This is why the scriptures use analogies like winemaking, agriculture, pottery. All are processes moving towards a goal where something is changed, often under pressure or through movement. It's the process of building us towards where we are going. So my big point this morning is what we see in the early church, how the gospel goes out from a couple hundred people out throughout the entire Roman world, eventually turning the entire empire on its head, is that purpose must be accompanied by perseverance. Purpose must be accompanied by perseverance. And I want to say this: to get to 20 people being baptized for this congregation, it's going to require perseverance, not just an excited moment which then peters away. And I want to say this second point: perseverance is utterly essential for many of us as we walk towards Jesus and the people that Jesus wants us to be. But we don't like the word perseverance. We recoil because the process is often difficult. We live in an age and a time of shortcuts. There's an article that just came out recently that already, only 2 years after ChatGPT was rolled out, that already neuroscientists can map atrophy in the brains of people who use ChatGPT to answer all kinds of questions. What should I do about this? Punch in questions. And ChatGPT is just the last iteration of a whole process which wants to make life frictionless and smooth without any kind of difficulty. But there's something in the friction. There's something in the difficulty which grows us, which points us back to God. Now, in thinking about this, what we realize is that the world wants shortcuts. The world avoids difficulty because the world actually has a very different understanding of time. The world, and this is a great term from a Canadian theologian called Douglas Farrow, operates through a sense of what he calls fallen time. God creates the world, and he creates the world as a perfect place for us to be flourishing with God. He creates the world for humans to go out, to grow, to live in God's presence, to set about projects, to spread the good news or the glory of God to the ends of the earth, to have stewardship over creation. God creates time for you to work on things that flourish. When God creates the world, death has not entered into the creation. Shame is not there. Pain is not there. And so this is how God creates time. God creates time as the environment for us to have relationship with Him. To move, to be in a relationship is to know someone over time. But then into the world comes human rebellion and sin, death, decay, then enter into the world. And what that does is, it doesn't just change us. It doesn't just change creation. It actually changes time. Time becomes fallen. We know that new house or that new car that you just bought will have a smell of newness. The paint, what produces the new car smell? I'm not sure, but we all recognize it. But you know that at some point, things will start to break down. 10 years ago or something, we renovated our house and it was just fantastic having everything new. But it's amazing how quickly things begin to break down. We look at ourselves in the mirror, depending on your age. And we can see a similar process. We know that it's not like the movie Benjamin Button. Things don't go in reverse. The second law of thermodynamics, things move towards entropy. Energy is diffused and gets weaker. There is this thing that the relationship was beautiful, could break down. The job, which is rewarding, could end. On the horizon, disease, death. All of these projects that we put our hearts to, our minds to, our hands to, that there's something that has fallen over them. So we try harder and we push into things, and the world gives us all kinds of things, from things that make it easier or things that make it to be more productive. And we wrestle away at this reality that we live with fallen time. Time management stuff, I think, is really helpful. There's a baseline where it can be really helpful. But it also gets to this point where I think it's actually just trying to fight against the fallen nature of time. And there's a point where you hit the ceiling of human ability. But what Pharaoh says is that when Jesus is incarnated into the world, he is fully God and fully human and lives this human life. He enters into the things which had been marked by fallen time and turns them on their heads. He brings in a different understanding of time. Two people can be seemingly doing the same thing, but one doing it with a kingdom perspective, and this brings in a redemptive idea of time. I read 2 days ago one of the most upsetting stories I'd read in some time, of a mother in the UK who'd made her son, who was in his early 20s, and unfortunately her son, who was in his early 20s, she'd wanted to have kids. I think it was her only son. And she fed him this sandwich, and sadly he choked on the sandwich and died. On Friday, this woman, I think she was 56, perfectly healthy, flew to Switzerland and in a clinic ended her own life. And I read this and I understand the complexities and debates around end-of-life stuff, but a perfectly healthy woman didn't tell her siblings because she didn't want them to stop her. And I thought, this is a world emerging which has no answers for suffering. Through fallen time, she couldn't handle the grief. And somehow society now creating spaces where that's okay. Check out. A world which sees any difficulty to completely avoid. But then I thought of Jesus, who walks, man of suffering. But it's not hopeless, pointless suffering. It's a suffering with a direction towards the cross, but beyond the cross, the empty grave, ascended to the right hand of the Father. I think one of the great important messages of the gospel that's going to grow in importance for people in these days to come is that actually there is a point in all of this that suffering and difficulty can be redeemed with Jesus. And that beauty can be found in places that the world finds completely ugly. And I think that Christians even sometimes can be overtaken with this idea of fallen time. We can believe in Jesus, but not fully comprehend that Jesus wants to transform how we see the world. Jesus lives at a different timescale to the world. He lives in creation time. He redeems time. Suffering is given purpose. Life with Jesus moves towards meaning. The cross defeats the fall. Hope replaces fear. A new timescale in the world is resurrection time. That's what the disciples are living on in the book of Acts. Life with God, again, points to flourishing for us and for creation. So when Jesus calls his apostles to make disciples, this is also an invitation to lead others to Jesus and us into creational time. This is why in the text we read at the beginning, it says, go stand in the temple courts. Why the temple? The temple was the house of God. The Jews at this time believed that the glory of God had left the temple, that the religious system was broken. What the disciples are proclaiming, the angels are pointing them in the direction is, a new era has begun, a new temple is here, history is moving towards a different directions. And the angels say this, and tell the people all about this new life. Perseverance is important because perseverance releases transformation in us. And to be completely honest, for the 10 a.m. none wanting service, to get to the point where 20 people are going to be baptized, that will lead this congregation on a process of transformation. What it is, I don't know. But I do know that places where 20 people are baptized are often places where people switch how they view what they're doing, how they view church, how they view just being here, that your presence matters, that a greeting, a smile at someone matters, that how we worship matters, how we pray and contend, what we do beyond these walls. Daniel's probably not going to convert 20 people at the bus stop. He may. Don't want to speak negative. But if this is a project that God's calling this congregation to, it's going to require transformation. But there's two types of transformation, acting differently. But when you act differently, God does something in us. He releases something in us. In James chapter 1, verses 4 to 5, it says this, let perseverance finish its work, that you say it may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. When we walk in perseverance, it changes something in us. We walk in the way of Jesus. And when we back away from change and difficulty, we lose out on that release. This call, this mission, this purpose that Red is called to as a local church, that his universal church is called to, we have a purpose. But that purpose must be accompanied by perseverance. Let's pray for perseverance, for transformation to be released in us. James 1:12 says this, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him." On Friday night, Trudy and I went to the city just to the south and had dinner with Al and Deb Hirsch, who were the pastors that were my bosses when, as junior guy, I came onto staff at this church. At that time, the church was just meeting in South Melbourne. And what you are part of today was part of an endeavour where we planted part of that church out here in the east. At the beginning, it was 11 people, and it was in Trudy and I's lounge room. We would gather, and so everything that's grown out of Red here, Campbell, and everything has grown out of that. We were young. Looking back, I don't know if we knew exactly what we were doing. And it took a lot, really, to get where we are today. And on Friday night, as we sat there, not far from where I used to go to the office, sitting with Al and Deb, learning from them, we all had one of those moments where we sort of looked at each other and thought of the years that have passed, all that's happened. Alan and Deb have gone on to really be internationally known speakers and thinkers and written and travel the world, ministering to people. And we sort of had that moment where you go, look at all that God has done. But also, wrapped up in that is also this sense of the difficulties, the trials, the disappointments, the moments where you're not sure if it's going to continue. There were moments when I thought this entire thing would fall over. There are things that happened that many of you would have never known about years ago, but God used. I just want to share one of them this morning. And I reflected on this as we drove home from that dinner. We moved out of the house and we moved into our first proper church building. It wasn't big. It was hard to get church buildings. Churches use church buildings on Sundays, really inconvenient. And when you don't have a building, it's hard to find one. And for a long time, we were homeless. We went to different houses and small rooms. And finally, we got a church building that we could use. It's not there anymore. I mean, the building's still there. It's not a church building anymore. But it was the Salvation Army Chinese Corps or church on Elgar Road. It's an old building, used to be a boys' home. And out the back was this church building. Now, things were beginning to grow. We'd gone from 11 people and the church was gotten to 30. We tripled in growth. And people were coming and we were gathering worship and slowly doing things. Trudy did kids' men and we were doing everything. There was honestly some Sundays where I'm preaching, I'm on AV and preaching at the same time. I don't recommend it. I just turned 30. And something had been going on in the background for me, which I didn't fully understand. For some time, I'd been struggling with mental health stuff, which I'd never understood. It happened since I was younger. But basically, I'd flown to Queensland to speak somewhere and had one of the worst nights of my life. Went to the doctor, recommended to a specialist, and I was diagnosed with bipolarity, bipolar. It made so much sense of my life and the things that I'd struggled with and things that I thought were just something I was doing wrong. But also it was a big shock. I said to the specialist, what do I do? And they said, well, you need to have a quiet life. What's your job? Pastor. But I just would find these moments where I was just trying to get some stable ground. Today, I manage it really well. At times, I don't even realize that I remember I have it. And I've learned so many great things to do, and we're in a really good place. But I remember as we moved into this church building, as the complexity of church grew and the difficulties grew, it just began to get at me. And after this weekend and then being diagnosed, I preached the next Sunday. It's chaotic, there's people coming in, dribbling in, and worship's happening. And there was a guy who visited, and he'd had his own mental health journey. He was in quite not a great place. And I just felt, God, why am I doing this? Like, you've called me to do this. Yet at the same time, I'm going through this difficulty, which makes some of the ordinary things in my life so difficult to go through. And it was like the last song before worship. And this guy came up and he leant in 1 minute before I meant to get up. And he whispered in my ear this. He said, Mark, you and I are going into psychosis. Can you feel it? And I was completely thrown. And I got up on stage and I started my sermon. I just couldn't find a line. I began to panic that I didn't have something here, that I couldn't recall it. And then just this pressure and fear and I think the enemy. And halfway through my sermon, I walked off stage, out the door, and into the car park. I remember seeing the panicked look on some of the leaders' faces as I walked out, and people realizing, like, what on earth do we do now? It's like you're on a cruise ship and the captain jumps off into the sea. Like, whoa, who's in control? I wasn't in the room, so I didn't experience that. But I remember sitting on a curb in the car park outside, and the first thing that came to me was, you've just blown it. That's Red Church gone. That's your ministry gone. You're humiliated now. You have no authority left. Bipolarity won. The devil won. And I sat and had my head in the hands. I remember it's sunny. I so clearly remember that car park, sitting on this curb. From here to crouch sitting. Glenn, my brother, came out. We chatted. And then I realized there was this moment. And there's this moment where I had two paths in a forest ahead of me. One path, and this is not medical advice, this is nothing, this is just what was for me at that moment, was to go home. Glenn would have driven me home, it would have been fine to get home. But I just felt God saying, get up, go back in. Yeah, you're humiliated. But this is not about strength or talent. This is about you walking with me. When I'm weak, He's strong. And I walked back in red, blushing, embarrassed. I felt like I was blushing. I felt like a tomato. Don't know if I was or not. And I got up and I just shared, I've had this diagnosis and this is what's happened, and persevered. It wasn't some great fireworks moment. It was a moment where you put one foot ahead of the next and walk forward with God. But as we drove home on Friday night from the dinner with Al and Deb, I looked back and I thought about, if I had not gone back in, what would not be? Daniel, who was just up here, who came to our church from South Australia, turned up to one of our conferences, been an intern, developed here. You've seen Daniel grow, many of you have been ministered. Daniel wouldn't be ministering here this Sunday. Daniel and Melody met at Red at that road conference. They've got beautiful kids now. There are marriages, there are kids who are literally born. Now, I'm not saying Mark says his cradle his children. Please don't hear that. What God's done. And it's not because of me. It's actually persevering with him. And you see, when we persevere with him, even in moments when we feel humiliated or embarrassed or weak, and often it is, it's not a heroic moment. You often don't realize until you're looking back. But I just want to say to you, there are many people here who are going through tough times. And when you persevere with him, it releases redemptive time. There are parents here I know who are utterly smashed. After that diagnosis, not long after that, we found that we were pregnant with twins. But you've got to get a lot of sleep. Sleep's really important. Routine's really important. You're having twins. There is so many things that God has done when you persevere. So my encouragement is twofold as we end. Number one, God is calling this congregation towards a goal. Persevere. Incredible things can happen. Persevere towards this goal. There were people who don't know Jesus now who will find the life-giving message and resurrection power of Jesus coming into their life. Names written in the book of life. 2, for those of you who find it difficult and you've got this thing like, I really want to press in with my faith, but I've got all this going on. Those two things are linked. Part of pressing into faith is walking towards faith through these things, and in the midst of it, he makes us more Christ-like. So I just want to read one more time. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial. Having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised those who love him. I'm going to ask the band up and I'm going to pray. Let's stand. Jesus, I just want to pray a real simple prayer, actually. I just want to pray that you release endurance, steadfastness, faithfulness. Amongst your people here. For those going through difficult times, I pray, give them your hope. For those who just feel caught in the drudgery, I pray that you give them your endurance. For those facing trial and difficulty, I pray that you walk with them, walk next to them. For those facing temptation, I pray that they'll be able to repel the temptations of the evil one. And God, I just want to pray in this moment for a spirit of perseverance so that just as you did with me, I didn't even know you were doing it at the time, but I sense it now looking back, that you'll actually then create whole new trees of life. Decision pathways, which open up all kinds of possibilities. Jesus, may we not see following you as something which can only happen when we have a completely, quiet room, endless space in our lives. We know that life is so often not like that, that there are challenges and difficulty. So Jesus, I just pray that we may realize that just as you incarnated into this world of mess and people and stuff, that you also call us to follow you in a world of people and mess and stuff. And then actually through walking through that world, that we become more like you. And so God, I just want to pray and just lay before you, particularly for this congregation, this goal that Daniel's put out there of 20 people baptized. We know that requires transformation for us, but we also pray that you'll transform us to be more like you as we move towards that goal. And I should just pray now, draw people to us. If there's people who don't know you, who need to know you, begin to draw those people. Create divine appointments at workplaces, friends, family, bus stops. Send those who are seeking you to us, we pray. There's not a plan yet, maybe an alpha. We don't know yet. But God, we just pray that you show us your plans. But at this moment, may you just release your perseverance over us, that spirit of endurance, we ask and pray.